Cold Millionaire CEO agreed to one last blind date. The girl who showed up changed his life forever. I never believed in fate until she walked through that restaurant door. If you're wondering how a man who built an empire from nothing ended up finding his heart in the most unexpected place, stay until the end, because what happened next changed everything. If this story touches your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to see more life-changing moments that remind us all what truly matters. Alexander Reed drummed his fingers against the polished mahogany table, checking his watch for the third time in 5 minutes. The reservation had been for 7 p.m. It was now 7:23. He'd give it until 7:30, then he was leaving, another failed setup courtesy of his well-meaning but misguided sister, Claire. At 36, Alexander had built Horizon Technologies into a billion-dollar company through relentless focus and sacrifice. His personal life had been the casualty. 2 failed engagements and countless first dates that went nowhere had convinced him relationships were simply not compatible with his lifestyle. Claire disagreed vehemently, insisting he was just dating the wrong women. Just one more, she had pleaded last Sunday at their monthly family dinner. She's different. I promise. Alexander had reluctantly agreed, if only to silence Claire's matchmaking attempts once and for all. One last blind date, then never again. 7:28 p.m. He signaled for the check. That's when the restaurant door swung open, and a young woman rushed in, slightly breathless. Her chestnut hair was windblown, and she carried a worn leather messenger bag that seemed at odds with the upscale restaurant. She spoke briefly with the maitre d', who pointed toward Alexander's table. As she approached, Alexander noticed she wasn't wearing the typical designer outfit his dates usually arrived in. Instead, she wore a simple blue dress and practical flats. Her face was flushed from rushing, but she smiled warmly as she reached his table. You must be Alexander. I'm Emma Bennett. I'm so sorry I'm late, there was an emergency at the shelter, and I couldn't leave until the new volunteer arrived. Alexander stood, his ingrained manners taking over despite his irritation. Shelter? The animal rescue where I volunteer, Emma explained, settling into her seat. A litter of kittens was brought in, abandoned behind a dumpster. I couldn't just leave them. Something in her direct gaze challenged him to disagree. Instead, he found himself asking about the kittens as the waiter brought menus. Emma Bennett was nothing like the women Claire usually set him up with. She wasn't impressed by his wealth or status. When he mentioned Horizon Technologies, she asked thoughtful questions about their environmental policies rather than their profit margins. She worked as a pediatric physical therapist, helping children with disabilities. The animal shelter was just one of several volunteer commitments. You must be very busy, Alexander commented, surprised to find himself genuinely interested. Emma laughed, the sound unexpectedly musical. Says the CEO who reportedly works 18-hour days. Claire's been talking about me. Just enough to make me curious, Emma admitted. Though she failed to mention how intimidating you'd be. Intimidating? Alexander raised an eyebrow. The way you looked at your watch when I arrived? I thought you might fire me from this date on the spot. For the first time in years, Alexander felt himself truly smile. I considered it. Dinner stretched into dessert, then coffee. Alexander couldn't remember the last time he'd lost track of time like this. Emma challenged his views on everything from business ethics to the best ice cream flavor. She listened intently when he spoke but wasn't afraid to disagree. There was something refreshingly authentic about her that made his usual defenses feel unnecessary. When they finally left the restaurant, Alexander found himself reluctant for the evening to end. May I drive you home? Emma shook her head. I have my car. But I'd like to see you again, if you're interested. I am, Alexander said, surprising himself with his eagerness. Their second date was nothing like the first. Emma invited him to help at the animal shelter, handing him a worn volunteer t-shirt that was at least 2 sizes too small. Alexander Reed, who wore custom suits and commanded boardrooms, spent the afternoon cleaning cages and being climbed on by kittens while Emma laughed at his discomfort. Strangely, he enjoyed every minute of it. Over the following weeks, Emma introduced Alexander to a world he'd been too busy to notice. They served meals at homeless shelters, attended a fundraiser for the children's hospital where she worked, and spent a Sunday helping an elderly neighbor repair her roof. Emma lived in a modest apartment filled with books and plants, drove a 10-year-old car, and seemed completely content with her life. "Don't you want more?" Alexander asked one evening as they walked through the park, ice cream cones in hand despite the autumn chill. "More what?" Emma looked genuinely confused. "More, everything. A bigger place, a newer car, designer clothes." Emma considered this, licking her ice cream thoughtfully. "I have everything I need. And most of what I want. The things I don't have, like more funding for the shelter or better equipment for my kids at the hospital, well, those aren't things I need for myself." Alexander felt something shift inside him. He'd spent his entire adult life accumulating wealth and status, convinced they were the measures of success. Emma measured success differently, by the lives she touched, the difference she made. Their relationship deepened, but not without challenges. Alexander's world of board meetings and business dinners collided awkwardly with Emma's community-centered life. His executive team was baffled by his new interest in corporate social responsibility. His old friends couldn't understand why he was suddenly unavailable for their usual weekend activities. The first major test came 3 months in, when Alexander had to cancel their plans for Emma's birthday due to an emergency board meeting. "It's fine," Emma said on the phone, but her disappointment was evident. "We can celebrate another time." Alexander spent the entire meeting distracted, realizing with startling clarity that for the first time in his life, something mattered more to him than business. He left the meeting early, something he'd never done before, and drove straight to Emma's apartment, where he found her in pajamas watching old movies with her roommate. "What are you doing here?" Emma asked, surprised. "I thought your meeting." "Can wait," Alexander finished. "You're more important." The look on Emma's face made him realize how rarely he'd put anyone else first. It was a humbling moment. Their relationship wasn't perfect. They argued about his workaholic tendencies and her stubborn independence. Emma refused to let Alexander solve problems with money, insisting some things needed time and effort instead. Alexander struggled to understand why Emma wouldn't accept his offers to move her into his penthouse or upgrade her ancient car. "I don't need rescuing, Alexander," she told him during one heated discussion. "I need a partner who sees me as an equal, not a project." Her words stung because they contained truth. Alexander had been trying to fix Emma's life according to his standards rather than respecting her choices. It was a painful lesson in humility for a man accustomed to controlling everything around him. 6 months into their relationship, disaster struck. The animal shelter where Emma volunteered lost its funding and faced imminent closure. Emma was devastated, knowing the animals would be transferred to the overcrowded city pound where many would be euthanized. Alexander found her at the shelter late one night, sitting on the floor surrounded by dogs and cats, tears streaming down her face. "I've tried everything," she said when she saw him. "Fundraisers, grant applications, appeals to local businesses. We need too much to keep going." Alexander sat beside her, letting a small terrier climb into his lap. "How much would it take to save this place?" Emma named a figure that would have seemed impossible to most people but was a fraction of what Alexander spent on his vacation home. He nodded thoughtfully. What if Horizon Technologies created a foundation for animal welfare? This shelter could be the first recipient. Emma looked up sharply. "Alexander, I didn't tell you this to ask for money." "I know you didn't," he said gently. "But I've been thinking about this for a while. Horizon should be giving back more to the community. You've helped me see that." The Horizon Foundation was established the following week, with the animal shelter as its first beneficiary. But Alexander didn't stop there. He restructured his company's charitable giving, established a volunteer program for employees, and began using his business connections to support causes Emma cared about. The business press called it a radical reinvention. Alexander's board members were skeptical until they saw the positive publicity and employee morale boost. What they didn't see was the profound change happening within Alexander himself. For the first time, he found purpose beyond profit. He started leaving the office at reasonable hours. He learned the names of his employees' children. He discovered that success felt hollow without someone to share it with, and that sharing it with Emma made everything more meaningful. On their one-year anniversary, Alexander took Emma back to the restaurant where they'd first met. This time, he arrived early, arranging everything perfectly. When Emma arrived, on time, for once, she found the restaurant empty except for Alexander. "Did you rent out the entire place?" she asked, both amused and exasperated. "That's a bit excessive, even for you." Alexander smiled. "I wanted privacy for what I'm about to say." He took her hands, suddenly nervous despite all his preparation. "Emma, before I met you, I thought I had everything figured out. Success was a number in a bank account. Happiness was the next acquisition, the next deal. I was wealthy but empty, powerful but alone." Emma squeezed his hands encouragingly. "You showed me what really matters. Not what we have, but what we give. Not how we're seen, but how we see others. You didn't try to change me, you just showed me a different way to live, and let me find my own path there." Alexander reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, not the ostentatious diamond he would have chosen a year ago, but a simple band with a small emerald that matched Emma's eyes. "I don't want to change your life, Emma. I love your tiny apartment and your ancient car and your ridiculous schedule that somehow fits in everyone who needs you. I love that you care more about stray kittens than stock prices. I love that you made me a better man without ever asking me to change." Alexander knelt, holding the ring up to her. "I'm asking if you'll let me be part of that life. Will you marry me?" Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "On one condition." "Anything. We get married at the animal shelter, with all the dogs and cats as witnesses." Alexander laughed. "I wouldn't have it any other way." They were married 6 months later, not at the animal shelter, health regulations forbade it, but at a beautiful garden ceremony where several shelter animals served as ring bearers and flower dogs. Alexander's corporate friends mingled awkwardly with Emma's eclectic circle, creating unexpected connections that would later blossom into new charitable initiatives. 2 years after that fateful blind date, Alexander and Emma welcomed their first child, a daughter they named Hope. Alexander stepped back from day-to-day operations at Horizon, appointing a CEO who shared his vision for ethical business practices while he focused on the foundation's work. The cold millionaire CEO was gone, replaced by a man who measured wealth differently, by the strength of his marriage, the laughter of his child, and the impact of his giving. On their 5th anniversary, as they sat in their backyard watching Hope play with their 2 rescue dogs, Emma asked, "Do you ever miss your old life? The power lunches, the private jets, the empire building?" Alexander considered the question seriously. "I miss parts of it sometimes. The challenge, the adrenaline of closing a big deal." "You gave up a lot," Emma said softly. Alexander pulled her close. "I gained more than I ever gave up. You didn't just change my life, Emma. You showed me what life is supposed to be." And as the sun set on their modest but joy-filled home, Alexander Reed, once the coldest CEO in the business world, knew he had finally found the success that truly mattered.